In April of 1923, one of the richest men in England dropped dead in a Cairo hotel room. The cause? A mosquito bite. But here's the thing. 5 months earlier, that same man had stood in a doorway nobody had opened in over 3,000 years and walked straight into the tomb of King Tut. Within days of his death, newspapers from Boise to Baltimore were screaming the same word, curse, and the bodies, they said, were only getting started. For the last 100 years, the story's been the same. Open the boy king's tomb, and you die. It's one of the most famous curses in human history. There's just one problem. It's not real, and the true story of what actually happened to those people, the science behind it, is way better than any curse. This is the curse of Tutankhamun and how it completely falls apart. But real quick, before I get into it, gut check, be honest. If somebody handed you the key to that sealed tomb in 1923 and said, go ahead, walk in, would you? Yes or no? Drop it in the comments right now, before I tell you what really went down. And if you're into this kind of stuff, do me a favor and hit subscribe. We dig up one of these every week. Alright, let's get into it. To understand the curse, you gotta start with the moment that supposedly triggered it. November 1922, the Valley of the Kings, Egypt. An archaeologist named Howard Carter had been digging for years, burning through the money of his rich backer, a British lord named Carnarvon, with nothing to show for it. Carnarvon was about ready to pull the plug. Then Carter's crew hit a step, then another. A staircase, buried in the sand, leading down to a sealed door. When Carter finally chipped a hole through it and held up a candle, Carnarvon asked him, "Can you see anything?" And Carter gave the famous answer, "Yes, wonderful things." And folks, wonderful doesn't even cover it. Behind that door was the only nearly intact pharaoh's tomb ever found. Over 5,000 objects, chariots, thrones, jewelry, and that solid gold death mask you've seen 1,000 times. It was the biggest archaeological discovery in history. It hit every front page on Earth. And that fame, that's exactly what set the curse in motion. 5 months later, Lord Carnarvon was dead. Here's what actually happened. He nicked a mosquito bite on his cheek while shaving. It got infected. That turned into blood poisoning and then pneumonia. And here's the part people always forget. This was 1923. Penicillin hadn't even been discovered yet. There were no antibiotics, none. On top of that, Carnarvon was not a healthy man to begin with. Years before, he'd been mangled in a car crash that wrecked his lungs. That's the whole reason he spent his winters in Egypt in the first place, for his health. So you've got a frail, sickly 56-year-old with an infected wound in an era before antibiotics existed. Him dying isn't supernatural. For 1923, that's just a Tuesday. But then, the coincidences started piling up, and this is what lit the fuse. The night Carnarvon died, the lights across the entire city of Cairo supposedly went out all at once. And back home in England, at that exact same moment, his dog, a little fox terrier, reportedly let out one long howl and dropped dead. And here's the kicker. When they finally unwrapped King Tut's mummy a couple years later, they found a small blemish on his left cheek, in almost the exact spot where that fatal mosquito had bitten Carnarvon. Now, coincidence? Absolutely. Cairo's power flickered constantly back then. Old dogs die. But to a world that wanted to believe, that was all the proof anybody needed. Because here's what most people don't realize. The world in the 1920s was obsessed with the supernatural. World War I had just killed millions. Grieving families were packing into seances, trying to talk to their dead sons. Spiritualism was everywhere. The ground was perfectly prepped for a good ghost story. And the newspapers knew it. Even before Carnarvon died, a famous novelist named Marie Corelli had publicly warned that anyone who broke into that tomb would face dire punishment. Days later, he was dead. Suddenly she looked like a prophet. Then Arthur Conan Doyle, yeah, the guy who created Sherlock Holmes, went public saying an evil spirit might have killed Carnarvon. The man who invented the most logical detective in fiction was out here blaming a curse. And the press? They went absolutely feral. A dead lord, a boy king, a 3,000-year-old curse, and Sherlock Holmes himself co-signing it. That sold papers like nothing on earth. It was the viral misinformation of its day, except instead of a phone in your hand, It spread across every breakfast table in the Western world. And the story just grew its own legs. You've probably heard there was a curse carved over the tomb door. Something like, "Death shall come on swift wings to whoever disturbs the king." That inscription doesn't exist. It was never found in Tut's tomb. Somebody made it up, and it stuck because it was too good a line for anyone to bother fact-checking. Then came the body count. Every time somebody even loosely connected to the tomb died, the papers chalked it up to the curse. A financier who'd visited once, Carnarvon's half-brother, one of Carter's colleagues. String enough deaths together over enough years and you can make anything look like a pattern. But that's the whole trick, isn't it? They only ever counted the hits. They never counted the misses. And the biggest miss of all was the one man who should have been victim number one. Howard Carter. The guy who actually found the tomb, who cracked the seal, who reached in first, who spent the next decade of his life personally handling every single object inside it. If anybody on this planet was cursed, it was him. Howard Carter lived another 17 years. He died in 1939, in his own bed at 64, of cancer, a completely ordinary death for a man his age. The person with the most exposure to this so-called curse, by a mile, outlived almost everybody the papers pinned it on. You'd think somebody would have noticed that, but a curse that skips the lead guy doesn't sell papers. Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting. In 2002, a doctor named Mark Nelson decided to actually do the math. He pulled Carter's own records and found 44 Westerners who were in Egypt at the time. 25 of them were right there for the big moments: the tomb opening, the sarcophagus, the unwrapping. Maximum exposure to the curse. Then he asked a dead simple question: did those 25 people die any younger than the ones who weren't there? The answer? No, not even close. The cursed group lived, on average, more than 20 years after, dying right around their 70s, totally normal for the era. Statistically, walking into King Tut's tomb did nothing to your lifespan. The numbers don't just doubt the curse, they bury it. Now, to be fair, a handful of people did get sick after going into ancient tombs, and there's a real, non-spooky reason for that. Sealed tombs can grow mold and bacteria over thousands of years, stuff like aspergillus spores. Crack one open, breathe that air in, and if your immune system's already weak, you can absolutely catch a nasty lung infection. It's not a curse, it's basically really, really old dust you shouldn't be inhaling. And the boy at the center of all this, he's way more fascinating than the legend. In 2010, DNA testing finally revealed the real King Tut. He took the throne as a little kid, and he died around 19 years old. He wasn't some all-powerful god king, he was a frail teenager. He had malaria, a bone disorder, a club foot so bad he needed a cane just to walk. And sure enough, they found over 130 walking sticks buried right there with him. So here's the bottom line. There's no curse, there never was. What there was a frail lord, an infected bite, an era with no antibiotics, a grieving world starving for a little magic, and a newspaper machine more than happy to sell it to them. That's the real curse of Tutankhamun. Not a dead pharaoh's revenge, but how easily every one of us will pick a great story over a boring fact. A teenage king who could barely walk, buried in gold, forgotten for 3,000 years, and then turned into a monster movie by the morning paper. Honestly, the truth's the better story. So, be straight with me. Before this video, did you believe in the curse, even a little? And would you still have walked into that tomb? Tell me down in the comments. I'll be reading every one. Thanks for watching.